On a quiet summer morning in a small town, a 7-year-old girl disappeared from her home without a sound. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, just an open door and a missing child. As the town clung to its sense of safety, one devastating truth began to unravel behind the scenes. What seemed like a random tragedy was anything but, and when the truth finally surfaced, it shattered far more than just a family. The summer in Cotton Hill arrived with humid breezes and the pungent smell of wild grass in the air. The small town nestled comfortably among the green hills where everyone knew each other's names and lived in harmony. Emma Carter was used to the quiet streets at 6 a.m. She drove through the familiar intersection, the car radio playing an old country tune that served as a backdrop to the soft squeal of tires on the asphalt. After a long night shift at the town hospital, every cell in her body cried out for rest, but in her mind, there was only the image of Lily, her 7-year-old daughter, sleeping soundly with her teddy bear, her mouth slightly open, breathing softly like a kitten. "You're the reason I wake up every morning." That sentence always came back to her whenever Emma was so tired she wanted to give up. She stopped the car and stepped out into the slanting sunlight. The small house stood still, curtains drawn, eerily quiet. Emma put the key in the lock and opened the door. In her mind, she had already pictured Lily rushing out to hug her mother, chattering about her dream from the night before. Although she returned in the early morning, Lily was always waiting behind the door, greeting her with a bright smile. But what greeted her today was absolute emptiness. "Lily?" Her voice echoed, as light as a breath, but quickly vanished in the unsettling silence. She felt a pang of worry, thoughts racing through her head. Maybe she's sick today. The living room was normal. The kitchen was as tidy as when she had left for work. But when she stepped into the small pink bedroom, her heart sank. The bed was empty. Pillows were askew. The teddy bear, Lily's favorite gray bunny, lay face down on the floor. The back door was wide open. "Thomas," she called, her voice trembling slightly. There was no response. A few minutes later, Thomas hurried out of the bedroom. "Where's Lily, Thomas?" Emma asked, her voice shaking as she fixed her eyes on Thomas, hoping for an answer that would soothe her pounding heart. "I tucked her in last night, and she kissed me goodnight like she always does," Thomas replied, his voice trembling as well. "Emma, what's going on? Lily couldn't have left the house this early." Without hesitation, Emma pulled out her phone and dialed the local police emergency number. Every moment of waiting for the investigation team to arrive felt like an eternity in the house. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes, a patrol car, then another with K9 units. The neighborhood was blocked off. Neighbors gathered in small groups, their faces showing a mixture of anxiety and fear. The children were kept indoors, and fire trucks drove by without sirens, as a gesture of respect for the silence or the sorrow. A neighbor named Marla stood 3 houses away, holding a still steaming cup of coffee, looking toward Emma's house. She didn't say anything, but Emma could feel her gaze, both sympathetic and wary. A child, the son of the Anders family, asked his mother, "Mom, is Lily lost, Mom?" The mother just nodded slightly, squeezed her son's hand, and pushed him inside as if the question itself was an omen. Inspector Gordon, who had once caught Emma running a red light last year, was the first to get involved. He spoke to Thomas first, scribbling furiously in his notebook. Emma didn't remember the conversation clearly. Her mind was blank, as if someone had cut the most important part out of the film of her life. "No signs of violence," a young officer repeated. "The door wasn't damaged. No blood. No screams were heard. Maybe she went somewhere on her own." "No," Emma said, each word forced out. "She would never leave the house without me. Never." Thomas slumped into a chair, his face buried in his hands. "It's like she vanished." As night fell on Cotton Hill, the yellow porch light at Emma's house remained on. It flickered gently with the wind, like the trembling heart of a mother who had just lost her child. Emma walked into Lily's room and sat on the edge of the bed. She picked up the teddy bear and pressed it to her chest. The scent of baby bath and vanilla cookies still lingered in the fur. Every object in the room told a story, and they were all crying silently for their little owner. She opened the closet. Small dresses hung neatly, each one with a memory: the book fair, the trip to the bookstore, the 7th birthday party. On the shelf, the book Princess Cloud was bookmarked halfway through. The bookmark was still at the place Lily had stopped reading last night. Everything was in its place, except for its owner. Thomas walked through the doorway, paused for a few seconds, then left without a word. Emma murmured softly, "I can't lose you, Lily, I can't." In this town, people often said, "Bad things never happen in Cotton Hill." But that night, everyone understood that that belief had just shattered. No one knew that this was just the beginning. A week passed. The town of Cotton Hill gradually returned to its daily rhythm, as if the loss of a child could not disrupt the familiar breath of the eaves, white fences, and the sound of the late afternoon ice cream truck. People still greeted each other at the market. They still asked Emma in a low voice, as if afraid that just one loud word could break the woman who was trying to stand firm. But Emma no longer heard anything. She only heard the ticking of the clock and her own breathing, steady, meaningless. The house became too big after just 1 week. No more clattering slippers in the hallway. No more colored paper stuck on the refrigerator door with the scribbled words, "I love you, Mom." Also, there was no more clear laughter from the small bedroom. Emma sat on the floor, among the scattered toys. In her hand was a purple sweater, the one Lily wore when playing in the snow last year. It still smelled of warm milk and the baby skin that Emma used to bury her nose in every night. She stroked it gently, then folded it up and put it in a box, carefully, as if folding her own heart. There was a knock on the door. Emma didn't want to answer, but someone called her name. "Sis?" "It's me, Lucas." Emma opened the door, and her younger brother stood there. Lucas, tall, thin, his eyes dark circles from lack of sleep. He wore an FBI jacket, though he didn't always wear that badge, but this time Lucas came not as a relative, but as someone looking for answers. "I just came from the police station," Lucas said as soon as he stepped over the threshold. "They said they'll continue the investigation, but it's clear they're giving up gradually." Emma just nodded. She had heard that sentence 100 times in the past few days. "Sis," Lucas put his hand on the table. "No signs of break-in. No foreign objects, no witnesses. But there's also no evidence that she left on her own. The only suspect left is Thomas. I've told you so many times to be wary of him." Emma didn't answer. She stood up, poured water like a machine, then put it down in front of her brother. "That's enough. You don't understand," her voice broke suddenly, harshly. "You can investigate, you can write reports, you can suspect anyone, but you don't understand, Lucas. You didn't see the loving actions Thomas had for Lily. You weren't by her side every time she had a fever. You didn't worry about her being teased by friends. You didn't—" Emma choked. She gripped the back of the chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Lucas was silent. He didn't argue. He knew. He wasn't Lily's mother, but he was her uncle, and he loved her. "Then what do you want?" Lucas said softly after a long moment. "Sit here and wait for the police to call back, or wait for someone to find her for you, or let everything fall into oblivion like thousands of other cases?" Emma looked at her brother. In her eyes, there was no longer anger, only emptiness. "I don't know," she whispered. "I will find Lily in my own way," Lucas said firmly. Then he left immediately. Emma didn't see him off. She sat on the chair outside, the wind starting to blow cold through her sleeves again. In her hand was the small light, the porch light Thomas had bought at the flea market. It was old, the plastic casing had yellowed, but it could still light up if plugged in correctly. She reassembled it, plugged it in. The first light flashed, pale yellow, slightly flickering, like a lonely speck of hope in the darkness. "I beg you, my Lily, please wait for me," she said, almost praying. That night, Emma went to the porch. Her hand shook as she turned on the light switch. The yellow light shone again, this time not trembling. Lucas asked a colleague to search for cameras around Emma's house on the night of the incident. He sent Lily's file to all federal police stations. He tracked Thomas's financial transactions, even though no one suspected anything at the time. And he kept the cat drawing in his coat pocket, as a tacit promise that he would find the truth, even if he had to confront anyone. Emma still folded Lily's clothes every day. She didn't donate them, didn't give them away, didn't burn them. Each shirt, each sock was carefully folded, as if Lily would come home tomorrow and ask her mother, "Mom, where's my princess dress?" And every night, the porch light still shone, like the heart of a mother, even if broken, would always light up waiting for her child to return. Emma fell asleep in Lily's room, still holding the teddy bear that her little girl loved most. And then the memories of the past kept flooding back in her dream. The memories didn't come knocking on the door, but just slipped in like the cold wind. That night was also after a long shift. Emma had just changed out of her uniform when the phone in the locker vibrated. An unfamiliar number, and an unfamiliar male voice, dry, stern, as if trained not to feel. "Are you Miss Carter? I'm Captain Graham. We regret to inform you, your husband, firefighter James Carter, has just died in the line of duty." She didn't remember exactly how she reacted. She just remembered the hand holding the phone hitting the wall so hard that it bled. Her legs had no strength. The crying didn't turn into sound. And in her head was the image of James turning back and smiling before closing the fire truck door. "I'll be home soon. You can go to sleep. Don't worry." But James never came back. Emma stood at the funeral with Lily, who was only 3 years old at the time, wearing a white dress and sucking on a lollipop that no one dared to take away. She didn't clearly understand what death was, just asking a question over and over. "Mom, why is Dad sleeping in a wooden box?" Emma didn't know how to answer. She just knew how to bend down, hug her tightly and whisper, "Because Dad is too tired, honey." The entire funeral room went silent because of the child's innocent question. She was too young to understand what pain was. A week later, Lily asked again, "Is Dad scared when he runs into the fire, Mom?" Emma was silent, then answered softly, "Dad isn't afraid of fire because he knows there's someone waiting for him to come home. But sometimes there are fires that are stronger than courage." Then there was a knock on the door. It was James's old teammate, Ann Paul, who came home carrying an old envelope. "We found this in his locker at the station." In the envelope was a handwritten letter with familiar sloping handwriting. James wrote, "Emma, if you're reading this letter, it means the thing I feared most has happened. But I want you to know, I never hesitated when entering any fire, because I always knew there was you. There was Lily always believed in me and was waiting for me to come home. I'm not afraid to die. I'm just afraid of not seeing you and my child grow up. You're stronger than you think. And Lily needs you to be that strong. Promise me. Don't stop because of me, okay?" Emma folded the letter, hugged it to her chest and cried for the first time since James died. She cried, really. Not because of loss, but because the love was so great that the departure became too much to bear. Since the funeral, Emma couldn't turn off all the lights every time she went to sleep. She turned on the porch light, the small light outside the door that used to be a signal for James to know that his wife was still awake waiting. And for the first time, that light didn't lead him home. Lily slept in her mother's arms, occasionally whispering in her dreams, "Dad, don't go again." Time passed. Everyone encouraged Emma to open up, live for herself. But she refused all the introductions, the light touches of hands. She lived in the pattern of a heart that had once loved completely, and didn't think she could love anyone else. Until one autumn day, Emma was working the night shift in the emergency room when a man walked in. His face scratched, his left arm torn a long way. "I slipped when climbing the stairs." He smiled, his voice hoarse. "Honestly, I'm not used to living in a place with old wooden floors." Emma bandaged him, asking the familiar questions. Name, age, any allergies to medicine? He answered gently, politely. There was something in his eyes that made her look up again. "Thomas Walker," he said. "I just moved to town. I work as a computer repairman, but apparently I should learn more skills, standing balance." She laughed lightly, politely, not paying much attention. But when he left, leaving a simple thank you and a piece of paper with his phone number, Emma picked it up without throwing it in the trash like every other time. Not because Thomas was too special, but because he appeared at the very moment her heart was most tired of having to be strong for too long. A month later, Thomas came back, this time because he cut his hand while fixing a hard drive. "I swear I didn't do it on purpose, but it seems like God is trying to arrange for me to meet you again." Emma laughed, the first laugh after a very long time. She didn't know at that moment how much that smile meant. The world in Emma began to change color from gray to light blue. Since then, Thomas appeared at the clinic every day to take Emma home. A steady, deep voice asked, "Is Lily still well-behaved these days?" Small gestures gradually turned into habits, then habits into beliefs. But Emma didn't know that the new light that had just crept into her life was the second fire, this time not brilliant, but burning slowly. But if first love is a bright flame, then second love usually comes like a summer shower, not too fierce, but enough to soften the soil. And Emma, in her emotional thirst, let herself be soaked without realizing it. Thomas Walker began to drop by Emma's house more often. Initially, for very small reasons, asking her for advice on ointment for injuries, asking about the town center, or sometimes just to return a cup of coffee. One September morning, Emma opened the door to find a latte neatly placed on the doorstep with a piece of paper underneath. "For a less tiring new day. TW double quote." Lily discovered it first. "Mom, the computer uncle sent you coffee again." The little girl happily held the cup up, peering around as if looking for a secret inside the milk foam. Emma laughed, for the first time feeling herself blushing. The second time Thomas helped was when the faucet in the kitchen sink started leaking. Emma was going to call a repairman, but Thomas, who happened to be visiting, insisted, "Don't waste money on something I can do for free." In just 30 minutes, the faucet was no longer dripping. In fact, he even replaced all the new rubber gaskets and left the repair kit for Emma. That night, she realized that for a long time there had been a man in the house who not only came in, but stayed in a quiet but steady way. One afternoon, Emma was watering the plants when she heard Lily scream from the end of the alley. "Mom, my bike broke!" She rushed out to find Thomas bending down to fix the chain for Lily. The little girl sat on the curb, her knees slightly scratched, but smiling because Uncle Thomas had cleaned her wounds with a handkerchief and sang the wrong words of Miley Cyrus's song to make her laugh. "That's the most effective pain relief secret," he said, winking at Emma. In November, Thomas invited the two mothers and children to a picnic at a small lake 15 minutes drive from Cotton Hill. Emma hesitated a bit, but then thought, "There's nothing unusual, just an outdoor lunch." They spread a blanket on the lawn. Lily ran to play with the ducks near the shore, and Thomas told stories about his childhood. "I lost my father when I was 10 years old. My mother worked at a printing shop, raising my two brothers and me. Later, I opened a small software company but couldn't survive the economic downturn. Bankrupt, and again, empty-handed." He told it without grief, without flattery, just like a man was sharing, and that made Emma soften. "I used to think there would be no chance to build my own family, until I met you two. I feel like I need to protect, to shelter you two." That statement made Emma look away, but in her heart, something was warming up again, a feeling that she thought she had lost with James, the feeling of being protected. From then on, Thomas appeared as a part of life, not suddenly, not noisily. It was just that. Every time the porch light flickered, he fixed it again. When Emma's car swerved, he came to push it. When Lily didn't understand the second-grade math problem, he sat down with her. Thomas didn't force it. He was patient. And perhaps that was what made Emma feel safe. After a while, Thomas began to be friendly with the neighbors. He helped Mr. Walter next door re-roof, brought milk to Mrs. Nora when it was cold, and even volunteered to replace the light bulbs at the town library. He was always there, at the right time, in the right place, but never stood out too much. People said he was the kind of man that towns like Cotton Hill always cherished. Once, Mrs. Marla, Emma's neighbor, whispered while choosing fruit at the market, "Thomas is really rare, Emma. Not everyone is patient enough with women who have young children. Little Lily must be very lucky." Emma smiled lightly, not answering, but in her heart, she felt peaceful. She thought, maybe this time God had really had mercy on her. One time, when Emma was away on the night shift, Lily insisted on not sleeping in the room, but pulled the blanket down to the sofa, near the window. "It's closer to the light outside on the porch," Lily said. "That place will be safer. Dad taught me that." Emma remembered that statement later. Too late. But at that moment she just stroked her daughter's hair and said, "It's okay, honey. Dad Thomas is protecting us." And Thomas, from the shadows of the stairs, just stood there, smiling. The porch light shone a streak across his face, dividing his face into two halves, one gentle, one coldly emotionless. One rainy April afternoon, when all three were watching cartoons together, Lily suddenly said, "Uncle Thomas, if Mom allows, can I call you Dad?" Emma was surprised and turned to look, intending to intervene, but Thomas had already bent down and smiled. "If you really want to, then Dad would be very honored." His eyes flashed a strange emptiness, for less than a second. Emma didn't see it, but if she had, maybe she would have stopped. 3 months later, he proposed with a simple question, no ring, no kneeling. "If you agree, I want to be the person who goes with you two for the rest of my life." Emma didn't think long. She was too tired of loneliness. And perhaps, with everything he had done, or pretended to do, she believed. The small town rejoiced. Everyone said Emma was so lucky to have met someone like Thomas, kind, doing honest business, knowing how to love children. The way Thomas came into Emma's life was like a cool rain that healed her heart after the days of pain because of the loss of her husband. But why now even Lily has left her? But even though everyone believed in Thomas, there was still one person who had doubted him from day one. That's Lucas Carter. Perhaps because of his professional habits, he soon realized the unusual points from him. Returning to reality, after blaming his sister for not being careful enough with Thomas, Lucas investigated himself, while always keeping Thomas in sight. Emma didn't know exactly when Lucas started his own investigation. Maybe it was a week after Lily's disappearance. Maybe it was right after the day he walked out of his sister's house with a pale face and two hands clenched tightly as if holding something that was falling apart in his heart. The missing person file of Lily was brought back by him from the town police station under the name of a legal relative. Almost immediately, Lucas transferred the file to the MPU, Missing Persons Unit, directly under the FBI, where he had collaborated in several interstate cases. A day later, he sent a request to extract all traffic cameras within a 10-mile radius around Cotton Hill from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., the morning Lily disappeared. The data returned was dense, but nothing. No strange car stopped long near Emma's house. No license plate was covered. No suspicious person appeared. 3 weeks later, Lucas expanded the range to 25 miles. The result was still useless. He switched to the second direction. Long-distance bus routes, private transportation services, delivery trucks. All drivers with schedules passing through Cotton Hill that morning were screened. Interview. A few people vaguely remembered seeing a children's bicycle on the side of the road, but no one remembered clearly if there was a child standing nearby. No witnesses, no images. All traces were erased as if with a cold eraser. Lucas wrote in his diary. The abductor, either extremely random or meticulously planned in advance. Later on, Lucas favored the second clause. He began sending Lily's file to more than 200 federal police units, from California to Florida, accompanied by a handwritten letter detailing the case, calling attention to any traces related to a 7-year-old girl, 1.15 meters tall, brown hair, blue eyes, clear voice, with a small star-shaped birthmark behind her left shoulder. Responses were scattered. Some cases of unidentified children were found in other states, but when compared, all were not Lily. Lucas learned to accept disappointment as part of the job. Colleagues thought he was strange. Some were sympathetic. A few said straight out, "You're sacrificing your career for a case with a known outcome, Lucas." Lucas didn't answer. He didn't need them to understand. He just needed a clue. And then, in the 3rd year after the disappearance, a small thing happened. But to Lucas, it was the first cry from a door that was closing tightly. A colleague in the Civil Documents Department sent him a copy of the application for a reissuance of the original birth certificate from a state nearly 1,200 miles from Cotton Hill. The child's name in the application, Lily Carter. Lucas almost didn't believe his eyes, but when checking carefully, he saw the application was rejected because the information of the guardian did not match the system. The official reason was missing mother's last name, but Lucas understood. Someone was trying to make documents for Lily, or a child named after her, with the original file. The application was submitted online. The IP address was a small internet cafe. No security cameras, no user identity registration. But Lucas knew clearly it was not a coincidence. He stored all the data, sent a request to expand the investigation to the Crime Technology Department. At the same time, for the first time, he added the name Thomas Walker to the FBI's internal surveillance list after a long time of only monitoring in a personal capacity. Thomas was never an official suspect. The town police recorded him as cooperating well with alibi evidence. But Lucas remembered, that morning, Thomas did not leave the house as he claimed. No camera verified that. Everything was based on one-sided testimony. Yet now, a trace had appeared. That night, Lucas returned to his cramped apartment in Arlington. He opened his wallet, took out the laminated photo of Lily. Lily smiled brightly, dimples clearly visible, hair tied on both sides with purple ribbons. The photo was taken at her 6th birthday party. He had carried that photo for 10 years. It was worn at the edge, a blue ink dot smeared below the word Lily. But the eyes in the photo were still the same, looking straight, clear, and trusting. Lucas leaned back against the wall, holding the photo, and whispered, "You will definitely find her, Lily." Outside, the whole of America was lit up. Towns like Cotton Hill closed early. Mothers called their children into the house, locked the front door, turned off the porch lights. Only Lucas, in his small apartment, turned on a yellow light by the window. The light was dim but persistent. Not to wait for anyone, but to remind himself, somewhere, a child had not yet returned home. 10 years after Lily went missing, Lucas Carter had almost become an unofficial expert in the field of finding missing children. His file had cases that were closed, some that failed, many that could not be determined to end. But there was one file he never closed. Code L17112, Lily Carter. In October 2022, Lucas was assigned to support a special project, breaking up an interstate human trafficking ring, coordinated by the FBI and ICE in Texas. In a warehouse near the border, the task force seized 14 storage devices, servers, hard drives, encrypted laptops, belonging to an organization called Blessed Wings. Lucas did not directly participate in the raid, but he was present at the data center just 48 hours later, when the technology department began decrypting the files protected by a complex code string. Every hour, thousands of documents appeared: payrolls, transactions, fake papers, passport photos, and things even worse. He had looked through hundreds of names until a line of text appeared, making all the sounds in the room suddenly disappear. TWG17. Transaction code 17.06/2012. Girl, no documents, under 10 years old. Transfer price $25,000 USD. Recipient Thomas Walker. Lucas stood up from his chair, cold chills. The transaction code was marked by initials, TW. That was Thomas Walker. Coincidence? Impossible. The time matches. The name matches. The description, female child without documents under 10 years old. All matched. His trembling fingers tapped, opening the account history section. A transfer section was revealed. $25,000 was sent from an account in Nevada to a fake-name transit station in Massachusetts, a station that the FBI later identified as a child trafficking hub in the Blessed Wings system. The person withdrawing the money at the receiving end, T. Walker. Lucas requested to open all mobile phone records from the gas station area at that time. Fortunately, the national gas station system had begun to digitize data in real time, storing images for 10 years. A video appeared after 36 minutes of searching. Forest Ridge Gas Station, 6:12 a.m., June 17, 2012. In the video, a silver-gray SUV pulled into the gas pump. A middle-aged man stepped out. Tall, thin, short hair, light blue t-shirt, khaki pants. Thomas Walker. The man was filling gas while looking around, carefully, then went inside. Meanwhile, in the back seat, a child sat still. Unclear face, but brown hair, holding a gray teddy bear. Lucas stared intently, his hands shaking. He knew that bear clearly. For a moment, his heart was squeezed by an invisible hand, not just because the child in the video might be Lily, but because, if true, it meant that she was still alive at least that morning, a few hours after Emma left home. And Thomas, while Emma was frantically searching everywhere, drove Lily away as if nothing had happened. Lucas didn't take his eyes off the screen. He rewound the video 3 more times. Each time it seemed like the child turned her head a little more, leaning slightly towards the window. There was a moment near the end of the clip, the girl pressed her forehead against the window. Messy hair, chin slightly tilted, unclear face, but the hand holding the bear. There was a faint birthmark on the left shoulder, revealed because the shirt was off. Lucas breathed heavily. Star-shaped birthmark on the left shoulder. That was exactly Lily. Not stopping there, Lucas requested to open the mobile phone records from the gas station area at that time. A device was recorded picking up a signal, not registered under Thomas's name, but the IMEI number matched the device that once logged into his bank account. The traces became clearer and clearer. Thomas had changed his name, changed his residence, but still reused the same old device, which now became the final key. Lucas printed out all the evidence, marking each detail by hand. His eyes were bloodshot from staying up all night. On the table, the cup of coffee had been cold for 3 hours. On the wall, the map of Thomas's route from Cotton Hill to Phoenix was pinned up like an escape map. Emma received a call from her brother at 1 a.m. "I've found the culprit." On the other end of the line, she didn't answer right away, only breathing, choking. Lucas waited. Then Emma blurted out like a confession. "Maybe you suspected correctly, huh?" Lucas didn't say anything more. No need. Both understood clearly. At that moment, there was no anger, only a large crack that a lifetime could not fill. Only a short time after Lily went missing, Thomas had left Emma's house for just one truncated reason. "I'm sorry, but I feel too suffocated. Maybe we need space to heal ourselves. You can call me anytime if you need someone to share." But from the day he left, he never contacted Emma again, and no one could contact him again. 3 days later, Lucas and the legal team gathered all the evidence: copies of transactions, gas station cameras, verification of the TWG17 code matching Lily's file. They took the file to the arrest department and started the plan to verify Thomas's current traces. Following the IP address submitted for the birth certificate 3 years ago, Lucas identified an access point once used for banking activities, a small apartment in the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. The apartment was rented under the name Todd Wallen, a strange name, but the date of birth, registered phone number and photo from the driver's license all pointed to one person, Thomas Walker. The one who had carried Lily had called her daughter, had cooked breakfast, and sang lullabies at night. The one who had sold her off for $25,000 for some wretched reason that Lucas himself didn't want to know. Because no reason could justify that crime, people often think when they catch the one who hurt them, the first thing they want to do is give him a punch. But the truth is not that simple. There are pains that last so long that, when facing the one who caused it, people only see an emptiness, cold and deep as an abyss. Emma Carter stood in front of the wooden door that had peeled paint on the second floor of a rundown apartment complex in the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. The harsh afternoon sun swept through the hallway, making her hands sweat. But her face did not move at all. Beside her, Lucas stood still like a stone. His hands were hidden behind his back, ready to signal the special forces waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Emma clenched her hands tightly. A knock on the door. Short, decisive, silent. Inside, there was the sound of slippers touching the floor. The door opened. Thomas Walker appeared, his hair grayer than before, pot-bellied, his skin tanned. He looked at them, not panicking, not pretending to be surprised, not asking, "What's going on?" just pursing his lips as if he had been waiting for them for a long time. "Ah, finally came to find me, huh?" he said. His voice was as calm as if greeting a neighbor. Emma didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she stepped up one step, face to face with him, not drawing a gun, not screaming, not crying. "I used to believe you," she said, her voice deep but clear each word. "Lily used to believe you. She used to hug you every night, put a kiss on your cheek before going to sleep, call you Dad. You used to kiss my child. You used to sing lullabies to her. Why did you do that to my child and me?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He glanced at Lucas, then looked at Emma again. A flash of cunning passed in his eyes, as if choosing words to hurt the most. "What were you and your child worth?" He laughed softly, contemptuously. "Once the value of exploitation is over, they have to be sold. Did you think those cheap hugs and kisses were real affection?" Emma couldn't stand firm. She backed away, bumping into the hallway wall. Part of her wanted to scream. The other part was silent, as if her throat had turned to stone. He survived? "What about Lily?" Lily cried silently in the back seat of the car. Called Mom. Believed Dad would come back to pick her up. And him, the devil standing in front of Emma, just put her into the darkness, locked the door, and left. Emma suddenly asked, not because she needed an answer, but because she had to say it. "What was the last thing she asked you?" Thomas raised his head, blinked. "Asked if she could come back home." I said, "No, kid. This is your new home now." She didn't cry. Then she asked, "Will Mom come to live with me? Will Uncle Lucas still come to visit me?" Then I answered, "Yes, but probably in the next life, sweetheart. Now go inside." Lucas bit his teeth tightly, blood seeping from his lips. He raised his hand to signal the agent next to him, his eyes not leaving Thomas. "You bastard. You're more bastard than livestock." Thomas still laughed, arrogantly as if he was the winner. "There's nothing left to lose, right?" "I survived. I escaped. All those years, you didn't do anything." Emma took another step back, her hands drooping. Her face was as pale as if there was no blood left. Behind her, a young policewoman came up and placed her hand lightly on Emma's shoulder. She whispered, "You are the bravest mother I have ever met. I have a son the same age as Lily at the time. I can't imagine what I would be like in this situation." Emma nodded, not answering. Not because she didn't want to, but because in her, the words were over. Thomas didn't resist, didn't scream. didn't object, standing still, letting them put his hands in cuffs. When he was dragged past Emma, he even looked back. And that was the moment Emma saw the most frightening thing. His eyes were completely empty. No remorse, no fear, no trace of what was once called a person. In the interrogation room of the Phoenix police station, Emma and Lucas sat in front of the two-way mirror. On the other side, Thomas sat, still cuffed, his eyes looking into space. Lucas stood outside, his hand clutching the photo of Lily, the photo he had held for 10 years. He couldn't come in, couldn't break the conversation. But his lips were pursed tightly, his eyes reddened. Emma turned her back. She didn't cry, didn't scream, but her back trembled slightly as if carrying a storm inside her. She came out, walked straight, not looking back. Behind, Thomas still sat, silently, one who didn't know that in the end, he was the one left behind. Leaving the police station, it was dark. Streetlights came on, casting Lucas and Emma's shadows down the empty sidewalk. Emma didn't say anything. Neither did Lucas. Only when they got in the car did he take out the old handkerchief. That used to belong to Lily, and place it in his sister's lap. "Now we know the truth," he said. "Now we have to learn to accept it and keep living." Emma looked at the handkerchief. Folded small, slightly worn at the edge, once used by Lily to wipe drool for her teddy bear Toby. She took it, her fingers clenching so tightly they turned white. They drove away in the Arizona night, carrying a memory that could not be returned, but also carrying something new. Freedom. Not for Thomas, but for Emma, and for Lily, wherever she was, whenever it was. Lucas and Emma together went to the house that was said to have once held Lily captive. The house was located nearly 2 hours' drive from the small town in Texas. Hidden behind rows of dead pine trees, the corrugated iron roof had collapsed by half, the window panes cracked, green moss growing thick on the face brick. If it weren't for the coordinates from the map obtained in the Blessed Wing server, no one would believe this place had once been a child transit point. Lucas got out of the car first, his hand gripping the double-folded satellite photo. Local police had cordoned off since yesterday, but left the examination inside to him and a technical agent. Emma followed, walking each step as if her feet were stuck in stone. Every creaking door, every old bloodstain on the wooden floor made her want to turn away. But then she looked back at Lucas as if to ask, "Are you sure? Is it necessary to see it with your own eyes?" Lucas nodded once without speaking. The answer didn't need words. They ransacked the ground floor, then the basement, where the concrete walls were streaked with hasty plaster marks. In a corner of the wall, there was a small iron box. Inside were a few children's items, a doll with a broken head, a pair of plastic shoes that had lost their straps, and a pale pink bracelet. Emma almost collapsed when she saw it. "It's hers," she whispered. "On her 6th birthday. I carved her name on the back myself." Lucas gently picked it up, turning the face of the bracelet. Under the dust and rust, the words were still clear. "Lily, Mom loves you." The forensics lab confirmed. The small bone fragment found nearby belonged to a girl from 6 to 8 years old. Height, bone density, bone age, completely matched Lily's data. After conducting a DNA comparison from Emma's hair sample, the final conclusion was given after 3 days. Match. 99.98%. It's Lily Carter. Lucas held the file, squeezing it until it wrinkled. He walked slowly towards Emma, sitting alone on a long bench in front of the police station door. She didn't look up, but when Lucas came closer, she just said softly, "I don't need to read it. I know already." There were no tears, no screams, only silence, as when people realize there is nothing left to hold on to. Emma decided to bring Lily's ashes back to Cotton Hill. No widespread announcements, not asking the funeral home. She just stuffed the old iron box into her backpack. Inside was a ceramic urn with ashes, along with the bracelet, the surviving teddy bear Toby, and the scribbled drawing of a cat with a heart tail that the FBI had sent back. Returning to town, people looked at Emma with nameless eyes. Not pity, not avoidance, but silence. They didn't know what to say. No one had enough words to encompass a mother bringing her child's ashes home after 10 years of searching. Emma nodded to each person, her eyes not wet, her hand still gripping the backpack strap. That afternoon, she stood in front of the backyard where Lily used to chase butterflies. There was a pink cosmos tree that was almost twice the size of an adult. Under the base, grass grew up to her knees. Emma shoveled the earth herself, not needing anyone to help. Lucas stood in the distance, his eyes red, but not intervening. She dug slowly, each stroke as if whispering to the earth. When it was deep enough, she placed the urn down, neatly, gently. On the lid of the urn, she pasted a small piece of paper. "Mom has been lighting the light waiting for you. Now you can rest." Before filling the earth, she sat by the grave for a long time. Next to the urn of ashes, she took out a few small items that she had kept in the wooden box by her bedside for 10 years. A strand of Lily's hair kept in a small folded piece of paper, a letter the little girl had written with crooked lines and a distorted sun, and a red plastic bottle cap, which Lily used to call rainbow money because it sparkled in the sun. Emma put everything down on the ground, wrapped her arms around her knees, gently bowing her forehead to touch the extinguished porch light. "If there is anything Mom regrets most," she whispered, "it's that when you called me in that car, I couldn't hear you." The wind rose, making the leaves of the pink cosmos tree sway slightly. In a moment, she felt as if someone had just gently touched her shoulder, as light as the wind, as warm as the little hand that used to touch her cheek every morning. When she stood up, the afternoon light had receded completely into the sunset. No one applauded, no speeches, no pastors reading the final words. But because of that, Lily was laid to rest, not among strangers, but in the only arms that were always waiting for her, the mother who never left. Before filling the earth, Emma removed the last porch light, the one she had never turned off for 10 years, from the doorstep of the house. The light was no longer on. The bulb was burned out. The wires were worn. But to her, it didn't need to shine anymore. She placed the light on the grave, not saying anything. The evening wind blew through her hair, and for the first time, she felt a real emptiness. No more hope, no more assumptions, no more ability to deceive herself. Lily was gone, had truly left this world. That night, Emma didn't turn on the porch light. She sat in the darkness of the living room, her arms around the pillow that used to belong to her daughter. Outside there was thunder, but no rain. Just the sound in the sky, like the sigh of someone who was also in pain but couldn't cry. Lucas called, asking if she wanted him to stay overnight. Emma answered softly, "No, go home. I think, today, I need to be alone." He understood, and he respected it. Near midnight, Emma went to the porch, her hand holding a cup of ginger tea. She sat down on the wooden chair, looking towards the land behind the house. The moonlight shone obliquely on the ground where Lily rested. And in that moment, Emma didn't see Lily as ashes, as memorabilia, or as pain anymore. She saw her running, arms outstretched, laughing like wind chimes. Her white dress fluttered in the wind. "Good night, my daughter," she whispered. "This time, Mom won't let you wait anymore." The December wind in Cotton Hill was not as sharp as the northern wind, nor as humid as the sea breeze. It carried the dry, cold smell of fallen leaves, mixed with the faint scent of withered flowers and grass. The kind of wind that, when it blew, didn't make people shrink, just enough to make the mind sink, as if reminding of something old. Emma sat on the old wooden chair in the backyard, next to the base of the pink cosmos tree that had now shed almost all its leaves. She wore her mother's old hand-knitted scarf, her hand holding a cup of cold ginger tea. Across from her, Lucas had just placed 2 folding chairs down on the grass, then poured himself a glass of orange juice, sitting down as if they were just 2 siblings waiting for the sun to rise. They had been silent like that for nearly half an hour, each person with a thought, not because they didn't know what to say, but because they didn't need to say anything anymore. A month had passed since the day Emma placed Lily's ashes in the ground next to the cosmos tree where she used to chase butterflies. Since then, she hadn't turned on the porch light any night, but every night there was wind. And she believed somewhere in the wind, Lily was still running. This morning, Emma cleaned out an old drawer. In a small tin box, something she had avoided opening for 10 years, there was a letter. The piece of paper had yellowed. The ink was slightly smeared. James's handwriting. The letter he wrote before going to put out the last forest fire. Not sent. Perhaps he intended to deliver it directly if he returned. But he didn't return. Now, Emma held the letter in her hand, reading it for the first time, slowly, not missing a line. If I don't come back, it's not because I don't want to. I used to be someone who was afraid of everything. Afraid of the dark, afraid of loneliness, afraid of failure. Only when I had you and Lily did I learn what it means to love and be loved. If I don't come back, teach our child to love the world, as you taught me. Don't let her grow up thinking that love is dangerous, because if you're reading this letter, it means I loved to the end. Emma folded the letter, placing it on her lap. The wind blew through, gently sweeping her hair. For the first time in a long time, the corners of her mouth twitched, not smiling aloud, just a slight curve like a butterfly's wing resting. Lucas cleared his throat lightly. He took out an old envelope from his coat pocket. Old neighbor Mrs. Lydia sent it back, found it in an old album, said that you would definitely want to keep this. He placed it on the wooden table between the two. Emma opened it, gently pulling out the photo that had faded over time. In the photo, Lily, 6 years old, hair tied on both sides, face smeared with cream, hugging Thomas's waist tightly. The little girl smiled brightly, her eyes sparkling. As for Thomas, looking straight at the camera, a half smile on his face. His eyes at that time, Emma realized now, had no anchor. Emma looked at the photo for a long time. She used to love someone who wasn't worthy, she said, her voice even, not trembling. Lucas didn't answer. The wind brushed past again as if covering up a sigh. Emma placed the photo down, her fingers stroking Lily's face lightly. A silence passed. Then she said softly, "But at least she used to love." The statement rang out softly like a prayer or a release. In the dim afternoon light, Emma's eyes seemed to widen. No more haze, no more heaviness, just a pair of eyes that had known pain and learned how to let go. Lucas smiled softly. He touched the tabletop, then stood up, walking towards the cosmos tree. He squatted down, using his hands to lightly rake the grass growing around the small nameless gravestone where they had placed Lily's ashes. "Do you think there will ever be a day when we won't feel pain when we remember?" he asked. Emma shrugged. "No," she said, "but I think at some point we will remember without having to avoid it." Lucas nodded, brushing a few weeds aside. Both were silent. A stray cat, from nowhere, jumped up on the doorstep of the house, sitting and washing its face. Emma chuckled lightly. "Looks like the cat Lily used to draw. She used to say, 'If Toby is a bear, then round-eyed cat is my best friend.'" Lucas laughed out loud. "Toby, the teddy bear that you mended up to 3 times?" "4, Emma corrected. Then they both burst out laughing, for the first time, a laugh not mixed with tears. A year later. Cotton Hill was still as quiet as ever. The main road still had only 3 turns. Mr. Doyle's bakery still had a sign, "Fresh blueberry pie every Friday morning," and the wind chimes on the porch still rang gently whenever the wind passed by, even if sometimes no one heard them anymore. But there was something new. At the corner of the street that used to be where the old abandoned grocery store had been for years, there was now a small cream-yellow house, windows wide open, hanging white curtains. On the wooden sign hanging in front of the gate, soft handwritten letters wrote, "Light Wind Library, for those who need a place to start over." Inside, Emma Carter was sitting on a round rug in the middle of the room, surrounded by 8 children. The youngest was only 4 years old, the oldest 10. All were eager, their eyes bright. In Emma's hand was the story, The Fox and the Last Leaf, her voice gentle, warm. And then the fox was no longer afraid of winter, because it knew, no matter how heavy the snow fell, the leaves would grow again. There is always a new leaf. A curly-haired girl sitting on the right corner looked up and asked, "Ms. Emma, do you have children?" The whole room went silent. The children looked at each other, waiting to see how she would react. Emma smiled. Her eyes were not sad, just a little something like the light of the end of the day. Light, quiet, warm. "I used to," she replied. "An angel named Lily. She used to love the teddy bear Toby and hate green peas. But she laughed like wind chimes, just like you guys." The youngest child cheered, "I hate green peas too." The whole room burst out laughing. There was no awkwardness, just childhood, and an adult who knew how to keep memories without letting them weigh her down. Emma closed the book, clapping her hands 3 times, a signal for painting time. On the walls, paintings were hung all over. Funny cats, trees with heart-shaped fruits, houses with smoke flying in spirals. In the middle of the wall was a large canvas embroidered by hand. Love is not giving up, no matter how long the darkness lasts. Under those words was Lily's name. No date of birth, no date of death. Just a name, as if she was still here, sitting somewhere with the crayons. In the afternoon, Lucas came. He didn't need to knock. The library door was always open. He brought a small pot of lavender flowers, which Lily used to like. When placing the pot on the windowsill, he backed away, admiring the space. The light in the library was not strong, but enough. Not the porch light longing for someone to return, but the light for those who are staying. Lucas turned towards the hill where Emma's old house used to be. The porch light of that year was no longer hanging there. The rusty iron hook had been removed. But no one felt sorry, because here, where Emma sat among the children, another light had been lit. Emma made tea. Lucas sat down on the long chair, which used to be Lily's reading corner when she was little. She brought out 2 cups of tea, adding a few cookies made by the children themselves. Some were burnt at the edges, some were misshapen. But they kneaded the dough themselves, smiling widely, so no one dared to criticize. "Are you okay?" Lucas asked. Emma nodded. Her hand gently rotated the cup of tea as if soothing her mind. "There is one thing I realized after all those years, is that it turns out we don't need to wait for light from the outside." "Why?" "Because sometimes we ourselves can be a light for others." Lucas was silent. He didn't need to say anything more. When the sun went down, the library began to close. Emma saw each child off. Some turned back to give her a hug, some slipped a saved gummy candy into her hand, some waved 3 times before disappearing behind the bend. When Emma returned to the room, Lucas was still standing in front of the wall hanging paintings. He stared at the canvas with that sentence. "Lily would be proud," he said softly. Emma didn't answer. She just went closer, turning on the small desk lamp underneath. The light shone on the word love in the embroidery, making it seem to shine. "I think, if she was still alive, she would do something like this." Lucas smiled. "You're doing it for her already." That evening, Emma sat alone in the library. Outside, the December wind blew obliquely across the roof tiles. She opened the leather notebook, the kind she used to use as a diary, and for the first time in many years, she wrote, "To Lily, I don't know where you are, but today, I told your story to 8 children. One has dimples just like you. One asked me if I was scared when night came. I said yes, but I still turned on the light, not for you to come back, but to let other children know that there is a place always waiting for them, even when they don't know where they are lost. I love you. But this time, that love won't just be waiting." She closed the notebook, put the pen down, then stood up, turned off the lights, locked the door. Her shadow stretched long down the paved walkway, but unlike 10 years ago, now it was no longer the shadow of a lonely mother, but the shadow of someone who had chosen to continue living. The story may have ended, but for Emma, for Lily, and for anyone who has waited for light in the darkness, dawn is always a real thing.